Hello and welcome to the Stack Magazine's podcast. My name is Stephen Watson and I'm the founder of Stack, the independent magazine club that delivers a different publication to your door every month. In this episode, I'm speaking with Kathryn Tann and Robert Harries, editorial directors of Folding Rock, the Welsh literary magazine. They launched in March 2025 and they've just published their fourth issue a year later. So I think it's a good point to look back at that first year, as well as looking ahead at what's still to come. So, Kathryn, Robert, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us on.
All right. So, as I say, we're a year into this thing, this project that you launched. Like, I think it's good to go back right to the beginning. Like, can you tell me, like, where did this idea come from for a Welsh literary magazine?
Well, I mean, it probably, to go right back, it probably came from Rob and I bumping into each other occasionally, both being in Welsh publishing and sort of both ranting and daydreaming about what we'd like to sort of see happen. And, you know, one day we'll help, you know, make that happen. What it would be, we weren't quite sure. But I guess specifically Folding Rock started with an open tender from the Welsh Books Council, who fund and support publishing and books in Wales. So it was kind of thanks to them that we were given that push to be like, maybe now is the time to actually put, well, their money where our mouth is and apply for that tender, which I know we've said a few times, haven't we, Rob, that like when we first saw it, our initial reaction was, God, I wonder what fools are going to go for that, because we just knew how big a task it was to start something from scratch like that, in the kind of landscape that we were working with at the time, but also exactly why it was so important to do it. So yeah, and we spent many weeks and evenings and long Zoom calls kind of imagining what the magazine could be in order to apply for that 4-year tender, and here we are.
Yeah.
And so you were actually working in the Welsh publishing industry already?
Yeah, we both worked, although hilariously never at the same time, for an independent based out of Cardigan called Parthian Books. I mean, I started my publishing career there, God, way back, farther than I care to remember, 2013, I think. And then I think I'd left to go to London and work in publishing there when Kathryn had joined. So kind of, we were always kind of like ships in the night. I think we used to run into each other at the London Book Fair. And that's kind of where I remember us, I can't remember exactly what year it was, kind of having the first like gestational conversation about, you know, because I think we both always felt that like whilst Welsh publishing does have like a healthy publishing scene, you know, and did have a couple of like literary periodicals every, you know, kind of like every kind of 3-4 months. I think we always kind of felt that there wasn't really that analog of like a Granta or a Stinging Fly or Gutter, you know, like a really country defining kind of, you know, publication that really collated the very best, like forward thinking, contemporaneous, like literary fiction and creative nonfiction. And as always with any creative endeavor, you know, like I said, like Kathryn said, sorry, she was kind of, you know, every conversation we had, it was always kind of like, oh, well, we want to do something, but obviously with any creative endeavor, the problem's always money. So, and we are fortunate in that, well, I say fortunate, you know, like Wales had 2 very long-standing periodicals, Planet and New Welsh Review. They unfortunately had their funding revoked, and that was kind of, you know, I guess a big blow to the Welsh cultural scene. But from that kind of pool of money that was funding them, the opportunity for us to kind of come into existence came about. So we're kind of trying to, I guess, honor the kind of cultural contributions that they made going forward, and, you know, kind of how basically it's bittersweet, but, you know, we're trying to kind of, you know, I guess do the old guard right, but also kind of create something new and, like I said, contemporary and cutting edge at the same time.
Yeah. And it really comes across in the magazine. the number of writers who you have in there who it's either their first thing that they're publishing, or like, maybe they're not like sort of big established names. And I thought it was quite remarkable. So in your first issue, I remember reading that, and you had like Sophie McIntosh and Joe Dunthorne. It's like, oh, okay. So the big names, like that, had that come from sort of your background working in the industry already? Like, you sort of like knew people who knew people.
I'm just going to say we didn't know them before, did we? We just asked.
No, we were fortunate there. I mean, what I will say is at the start, or from the very start rather, we've had amazing support from some really eminent literary figures, be they writers or publishing people, people like Philip Gwyn Jones, who used to run Portobello, then Scribe, then Picador, and now he's an agent. He's been amazingly supportive and has kind of linked us with lots of people. But in this particular instance, it was the writer Tom Morris, who obviously used to be the editor of The Singing Fly and has kind of helped, hone writers like Sally Rooney and people like that. He lives in Ireland, but he is very Welsh. And he kind of was one of the first people who kind of reached out to us and kind of gave us a bigger list, essentially, of, people we should be speaking to, people we should be contacting. And from what I remember, Joe and Sophie were, people on there. And I think because it was our first issue, especially, we were very keen to kind of come out of the gate very strongly with like a statement of intent with who we kind of felt, and especially Joe and Sophie, who are both London based, and a lot of people don't even realize that they are Welsh. We kind of thought it was like a kind of nice double, kind of a statement of intent in that, not only did we want these eminent authors with big literary stature, but we also kind of wanted to reaffirm that they are Welsh writers, and just, Joe, for instance, like God, Submarine is an incredibly Welsh novel. It's basically set in Swansea. But, a lot of people kind of haven't really kind of twigged him as a Welsh writer for whatever reason. So yeah, that was kind of, I think, our intent there. And like I said, we thank Tom for being, like networker extraordinaire there, really.
And Ireland are so good at taking credit for their writers, for really being like, look at all these Irish writers and really sort of claiming them. And I think we need to do that a bit more as well. And so we were sort of like, we're intentionally very generous about what it means to be a Welsh writer, but partly because we want to really show Wales, like we said it in at an event with Joe actually in the summer, was like, we want to make Welsh writing sexy in the way that Irish writing is sexy and Scottish writing.
Yeah.
And like it's there, the talent's there. It's so part of it is not just running the magazine and platforming brilliant work, but it's also making that statement about like, pay attention to Wales as a literary nation.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Absolutely. Like, what Ireland has is that collegiate kind of, cooperative nature. There's always collaboration going on, but there's always like a healthy sense of like competition among everyone there as well. And obviously the fact that they obviously have started trialing paying artists a living wage, so there that art is taken seriously as a craft, and an endeavor. And I think that's something every other country could kind of stand to sort of take a lesson from. But sadly, yeah. How far off we are of that, I don't know. But yeah, Ireland, it was the blueprint. We always kind of said, and every time we're asked to kind of give an analog, we say The Singing Fly was kind of our sort of benchmark for what we wanted to aim towards, just because of how they've launched so many eminent literary careers.
Yeah. Well, so looking back at that first issue then, and like the other writers that you had in there, so I noticed that you had a piece by Joshua Jones in the magazine, and then from like issue 3 he's a contributing editor, I think. So I came across Joshua quite recently from a piece that he'd written in Die Quieter Please, and so like sort of found him that way. How did you come across him?
Sorry, Kat, I feel like I'm talking a lot here.
I was going to say, Joshua is yours, Rob. You go ahead.
Well, I had the honor and the joy of being Joshua's editor on his Dylan Thomas Prize shortlisted collection, Local Fires, at Parthian. So I've known Josh now for a good couple of years. And yeah, he's always been a phenomenal writer. And when we did the very first sample issue, to present to the kind of potential funding board, we had 4 pieces in the sample that we kind of had made up, and Josh's piece was in there as one of the first. He was one of the first people we asked to do a piece, and he's just, like I said, a remarkable writer, and also someone who's he's like so talented across so much media. He's not only a writer, he's a musician, he's a poet. I think he's dabbled in art here and there. He's just really, really superbly connected. Like, he now runs his own press as well, DDID Press in Cardiff, with Ginny Dark, I believe it is, the poet. And yeah, he was just someone who, he's not only like a phenomenal writer, but he's someone who's really surrounded himself with, a vast network of fellow writers, musicians, and artists. And we knew, as well as having him in the issue as a writer, of which, like I said, he's a superlative one at that, and will have a very, very excellent future ahead of him. We also kind of knew he was someone we wanted to utilize the kind of, social capabilities of as well, because, like I said, he is just like remarkably well connected, and just excellent at what he does in all facets. But yeah, Kat.
Yeah, no, he's really good at like his focus as one of our contributing editors is kind of encouraging collaboration and the sort of more unusual commissions that we might do. So, encouraging our first guest artist for issue 4, which was the first time we did that, where we want to sort of bring in emerging artists each issue. She worked with Josh. It was him that sort of brought her in and encouraged her to write alongside her photography, and
that was the cover, right?
That's it. Yeah, Abby Poulson, and she's fantastic, and she's been we'll hopefully work with her again, because she was amazing. And that was partly sort of Josh's doing of he's got fingers in lots of pies and can really see the potential in emerging artists and what they might be able to do with us.
So was it always your intention from the start that you would start to build out this group of contributing editors? So that, because we should also mention, I think, Alice Conran and Horatio Clare. And I noticed Horatio had also written for the magazine, and then was like, this is sort of like you kind of hook people in with like writing, and then you're like, come and be a contributing editor.
I think so for us, we were anxious for the magazine not to be defined by Rob and I's taste. Like, obviously, we're both experienced editors, and we are relatively good at recognizing something of quality, even if it's not necessarily our personal taste. But there's always inevitably going to be a limitation to what between the two of us will pick, and we really wanted to kind of extend the taste of the magazine, but also the reach of it when it comes to that commissioning, but also encouraging people to submit as well, because we do both, and increasingly we want it to be submission focused. But as we build and borrow the kind of reputations of established writers, we're commissioning is quite an important part of what we do as well. And I think it just felt right to extend that input, the editorial input, a little bit. And it's quite, what that role looks like is a little bit experimental, and every magazine does it slightly differently. They might have editors at large, or they might have a freelance team, or just a bigger editorial team than we have. But what we do is we meet with them periodically between issues, and we talk about ideas, and often, they're bringing to the table names that we haven't heard, but we look into it and they're brilliant, especially when we're looking at specific themes. And yeah, so I mean, Horatio is someone who I knew because he'd taught me years back, and is extremely well connected. His address book, when it comes to well-known writers, is fantastic. So that was kind of the strategic move there of like, right, if we need to get in touch with someone who we might not otherwise be able to reach, Horatio's quite good at that, as well as being an absolutely fantastic, celebrated nonfiction writer. So that's kind of a win-win. But then Alice Conran is someone who is just so steadfastly passionate and supportive of Welsh writing and emerging Welsh writers, and her access to student writers in Bangor through her work there, but also just her eye for promising new writing is something that we like implicitly trust. So she was someone we really wanted to bring on as well, just in admiration for her as a writer and as a sort of teacher as well. So it was, kind of extending what we knew our limitations and are aware of them, and wanted to address that a little bit by bringing more people into the fold.
I mean, so adding like their capabilities into yours, clearly that's sort of, it's really added to what you can do as a magazine. As you look back on that first year, are there other things that you would say like, oh, like what we're doing now, this is like, substantially different to what you started with?
I think we've learned a lot, and I imagine it will change, I think, based on what we're learning. But it feels like we had such a clear vision when we started. We hardly even needed to discuss it, because we just knew, I think maybe partly because we've shaped this magazine into the gap that existed, like that we knew that gap needed to be filled for fiction and non-fiction, as well as some like creative criticism as well. But I think because of that, it's quite a clear path that we're taking. I suppose there are certain decisions we've made that define us a bit more as Folding Rock rather than another magazine. But so far, those decisions have stuck, and we're really happy with them. Things like reading all of our submissions completely anonymously, and that's come up numerous times, and is something we didn't think was a radical thing to do, but we're really proud of. And then
definitely.
other things like having our particular themes for our issues, and our approach to how we deal with acceptances and rejections as well, like so certain things, approaches that we take. So far so good, but I'm sure like over the next few years things will shift and change as we learn, but it's still quite early days.
Yeah, it's been good in a way that we had such a concrete vision for the magazine, because it has meant that we've been able to kind of get on with focusing on how to actually run a business, which is kind of the facet of this whole thing which neither of us obviously had any experience in. So I can't imagine how stressful the whole process would have been if we were trying to juggle. I mean, obviously there's facets of running a magazine which are slightly different to trade publishing, but at least in terms of the editing, the design, etc., like those are facets that we both have had experience with copiously in the past. So it's nice to be able to kind of know, not that we can run on autopilot, because obviously it's still a lot of work, but we at least are confident in our abilities with that regard. So we can kind of put a lot of energy into kind of, building the kind of logistics and the administrative side of this whole kind of structure from the ground up. I can't imagine how stressful it would have been if we were trying to juggle both. And I think it's also why we're trying to sort of surround ourselves with, like I said, not just our contributing editors like Josh, Horatio, and Alice, but also, our advisory board that we hired, in the last several months. We're really, really keen, especially because of the responsibility we have and the amount of money that we've been kind of trusted with. We kind of feel, we recognize what a privilege that is. And we almost have like a duty to kind of ensure that, we do the best job that we can do. And we're not arrogant enough to believe that we can do it just the two of us. We want to surround ourselves with as many kind of, supremely talented people as we possibly can to give everybody the best kind of magazine that, can serve Welsh publishing the best.
What is that board? I don't know about that.
So we have an advisory board, but again, kind of acknowledging what our limitations are, and when it comes to our like long-term, our ambition, we do say like we're quite ambitious in terms of our vision. I mean, it was ambitious to set up a magazine, but we always said from the start, like, we're only going to do it if we do it really well. And like, it was kind of all or nothing for us. Like, what was really needed was something really ambitious that had a long-term vision. And if it didn't have that, then it wasn't worth doing. So part of that is, kind of making ourselves robust and benefiting from the expertise and experience of others. So we've got a board. It's an advisory board, so it's it's kind of it's slightly informal in a way that allows people to really kind of help in a way that suits them, but also allows us to evolve as such a young magazine, but it includes people like, Kathryn Hayes, who's a very well-known literary agent. We've got Sophie Bouchelard, who actually was originally published in one of our issues, and since then we got to know and has an incredible experience in sort of people management and business strategy, which is invaluable for us. And then Ben Lloyd, who's very experienced in public policy and public affairs. Natalia Deliver, who's a novelist and an experienced marketer. Then also Emily Dafydd-Drew, who is from Literature Wales, who are a partner of ours. So that was a really nice connection to have her on the board. And then Kathy Madge as well, who's got a lot of governance experience, which is again something we really don't have. We're learning as we go. So it's like such a brilliant kind of, I suppose, backstop for us of like these people who we can call on if we need them. And again, like what that exactly looks like will evolve as we go. But it's nice to know that there are people who are willing to give their time and their support because they believe in the magazine and what we're trying to achieve for writers in Wales and readers, I suppose, as well.
I suppose it sounds like it speaks to the responsibility that comes, because you said it's like a 4-year funding, basically. So can I ask how much money that is? That must be a lot of money.
So I think it worked out as 3.5 altogether. By the time the the application process was completed, I think we'll be publishing our 11th issue by the time that sort of reaches fruition, and it's £80,000 a year. I think we can say that because it was all in the
public record.
Yeah. And it is good to be, and that's not our only income. Like, we work really hard to try and diversify our income, which is really hard in today's climate. But we are mostly reliant on that Books Council funding, and it's the idea is that by the end of the tender we will be less reliant on it, and we'll see what happens then. But what's really important to us is that we prove the cultural impact of the magazine, that it's not necessarily just about how many copies we've sold, but how, what that cultural significance is already. Yes. Which we're already seeing, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, and like we've really kind of developed. We see it at our events, especially, and people coming up to us like, I remember the very first event we did for our very first issue, like the launch party, we had people come up to us and saying like, this is amazing. Like, I've never seen so many people I don't know at a literary event in Wales, because I think Wales up till now has kind of had this reputation as almost like there's this core demographic of maybe like 100 odd people who you literally see at every event, especially in South Wales, which isn't a bad thing at all. It's amazing that there is that dedicated core of champions. But one thing we have kind of noticed is like, we really have this kind of like, and we've noticed over the events that we've done, this kind of growing, burgeoning sense of a community building around the magazine, which, is fundamental, I think, with any kind of cultural or creative or artistic institution to kind of survive. You really, really do need that like passionate core who, are all writers, passionate readers, some publishers. They're really kind of like the lifeblood of what we're doing effectively.
Totally. Any magazine has got to have its people. Like you've got to have like your core people, and then you can hopefully build out from that. I noticed in this 4th issue, there's a lot of stuff there that's not from Wales, or at least maybe it's a Welsh writer who's based in like, I don't know, India or something. But did that just sort of like come along, or is this you deliberately trying to sort of like reach out and stretch further?
Do deliberately try and reach out, and it's really important that the sort of subheading of Folding Rock is new writing from Wales and beyond. That again, we have a generous definition of what being a Welsh writer might be, or being connected to Wales in some way, but also showing Welsh writing in a global context. And we're keen to do more translation, and Rob's especially keen on translation, and we've attended Frankfurt a couple of times, and we're building up connections in that sense so that we can show Welsh literature belongs on that world stage. But in terms of issue 4, telling tales, I mean, we thought that, so it's folklore themed. We thought folklore was going to feel really Welsh as an issue, and actually it's our most international issue. It was full of surprises, and it wasn't something we expected. It happened really organically, and I think it really proved what we really hoped, which is that folklore is something that's actually really evolving and still completely modern and relevant, and that it can mean so many things that you might not expect, and it doesn't necessarily mean the Mabinogion. There's a bit of that in the issue, of course, but there's so much more, and so that was really exciting, and it happen quite organically in the same way that a lot of our, I mean, I suppose especially with blind submissions, these kind of themes that come out and the diversity of what we get is quite an organic process.
Of course, yeah. I'm interested in what you were saying before about, like, kind of growing the audience for the magazine, like, getting more people involved. So obviously it's National Year of Reading at the moment, and I feel like the narrative coming out of that is like nobody's reading anymore. Everyone stopped reading. Do you feel like with what you're doing, do you kind of feel like you're swimming against the tide with this? And then do you have a consideration when you're selecting pieces? Are you thinking like, okay, this is something that's going to bring people into us, or do you feel quite sort of confident in going like, this might be quite a strange or maybe experimental piece of writing, but it's us, so we're publishing this stuff?
Something we said right from the start, and Rob can expand on this as well, especially when it comes to fiction, is that we really wanted Folding Rock to be accessible as a literary magazine. For ages, we tried to think of another name other than literary magazine, because it feels like it comes with some baggage. If you think of something, let us know, because we're working on that. But like, we still need we still need a shorthand for what we are. But we didn't. I've got 2 English degrees, and there are some literary magazines that I feel aren't for me, that I feel like they're above my head, and the last thing we wanted was for Folding Rock to feel that way. But we also really believe in good writing, and good writing takes many forms. It doesn't have to be complicated or exclusive, and sometimes it is, sometimes it's experimental, sometimes it's weird, sometimes not everyone likes it and it's Marmite. But for us, one of the things we're looking for, whatever we're reading, is that it's enjoyable for someone to read. And there've been, a few sort of more out there pieces that we've included. But we're really thinking about the experience of an issue for the average reader, and making sure that it's something they can really engage with, really enjoy, and sink their teeth into, rather than feel excluded in any way from it. So, yeah, I'm sure you've got something to say on that as well, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the joy of working on a literary magazine, or kind of any kind of anthologized piece of creative writing. It kind of does give you that flexibility to kind of, because I think a lot of people forget that, like, curation and commissioning, constructing an issue or an anthology or whatever, especially when there's like multiple different voices and writers, is a kind of skill in and of itself. It's not just kind of like we get a load of work in and we're like, oh yeah, well, the random order, we kind of do have to meticulously work to kind of make sure we have like as good a breadth of pieces as possible. I mean, my own literary taste is probably quite that literary. I mean, like, my reading taste was kind of forged on like a lot of the independent presses, like, Fitzcarraldo, Under the Stories, Prototype, people like that. Probably a lot of people would say write more experimental, or publish more experimental, or kind of quote unquote loftier work. But I 100% agree with Kathryn that, like, to have a magazine comprised of material all like that would get quite boring and or quite obfuscating or obtuse very quickly. So, we have to be very keen, and, we kind of feel it's a really important kind of facet of doing a magazine like this, is that we have to feel that there's something in there for kind of everybody. There kind of, it has to be like a real smorgasbord of really strong pieces that can kind of all stand alone, but when read as a kind of collection, also give like a really, like, well formed and exceptionally skillfully executed kind of segment of Welsh writing and writers from beyond as well.
Sure.
So yeah, it's kind of, I agree with Kathryn. I mean, it sounds reductive to say what we want is good writing. And I know when we've done like, Zoom kind of workshops or seminars for kind of budding writers or budding submittees to the magazine, and they're kind of like, well, what explicit do you want? I always kind of feel slightly evil or unfair kind of just saying, well, kind of just good writing, because obviously it's a difficult thing to kind of, and obviously it's like an incredibly subjective thing as well. Like every editor is going to have their own definition of what constitutes good writing. I'm not quite sure if that helps at all.
It's an open-mindedness in that, like, we're open to we don't want to dictate what kind of writing people submit to us.
No.
Above all, it's all about quality, which again is partly why we read it blindly, because it's then all we're looking at. We don't know anything about what their experience is, how many books they've had published. Sometimes the best is when like we accept something that we think, God, this has got to be so mature, it's so well realised, it's got to be someone with a few publications under their belt. And then we find out that it's their first ever publication. That's the best thing. And simultaneously, we will have then unknowingly also rejected some very well-known writers. And if we'd known who they were when we read it, we probably would have been influenced by that. So it's being aware of our own biases. But also, just very quickly going back to your question about like year of reading and swimming against the tide, I absolutely feel that. And I also think that literary magazines have, they had kind of almost feels as though they had a heyday, and they've had a few smaller heydays since, but the trouble with marketing a lit mag from Wales as well is that we're not just persuading people to read our magazine, but we're also persuading people to just read a literary magazine. And that feels like it kind of almost needs to be a joint endeavour, that it feels like we need to persuade people to engage with, curated literature. It's kind of like the antithesis of the endless scroll, and that feels really important. So it's like trying to persuade people to do that, whatever the magazine is, and then hopefully they'll find their way to our particular magazine.
Yeah,
totally. Look, a rising tide, right? They're like a rising tide raises all boats.
Absolutely. I mean, on paper, you think literary magazines should really be the kind of medium of the moment, because, or, like short stories anyway in general, or short essays, because, if people are claiming that, people don't have the attention span for novels or anything anymore, you'd think this would be a more digestible medium. But I don't know, I guess from the off, we've kind of always known that, there are, on paper anyway, so many cards stacked against us, and kind of there have been from the off. I mean, we're a print first literary magazine from Wales, that kind of print on like premium paper and like take a lot of thought into design and everything like that. We are a luxury product at the end of the day, if we're going to be cynical and reductive about it. But I think we've kind of always known that, it's even baked into the name. My interpretation of the name was always like, to fold a rock is, at seeming first interpretation, pretty impossible. It's but yeah, I think we recognize that, but I think we also have confidence and trust in our ability to know good work, and to know that it's going to find the audience of people who are looking for it.
Yeah.
And we hope, as obviously time goes on and we hopefully build the prestige of the magazine, that word of mouth is only going to grow.
Yeah.
And, it's just going to kind of hopefully avalanche or snowball into something, greater.
And we like to say that, folding rock does fold eventually over a long, long period of time with a lot of determination.
Right. So you've got the 4-year tender, and then you've got like geological time.
In a couple of millennia, we'll be like,
we'll be
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we're like I said at the start, you're at the end of like the first year of making this magazine. Like this latest issue, like you just had like your first guest art editor, so like that's a big change. Have you got things in mind that like you've not managed to get round to doing yet, but you really want to do with this magazine?
Yes, always. We've got loads of ideas and no time to do them, but we will eventually. One of the statements of intent as well is our like issues are like 004. because at some point those zeros are going to be filled with other numbers. But so we've got time, but we hope we have anyway. But one thing, so we mentioned translation, we definitely want to do more translation, but also have a real continuous connection with Welsh language literature as well. So we're working on a scheme that will hopefully enable us to have translated Welsh short form writing in every issue, which is something we're really excited about. So there's that. We're hopefully going to create a few more kind of opportunities as well, because there are so few opportunities within publishing in Wales, or just outside of London in general. Something I'm really passionate about, with sort of having worked with New Writing North a lot and seen all of the brilliant development stuff they've done. But then also developing writers a bit more, hopefully having, once we've got our strong platform, having a bit more availability to then really help pipeline that talent with hopefully maybe one day a prize. We'd really love to sort of play that part. Prizes are so important in the ecosystem, and they sort of really feel as though they're kind of coming and going in today's turbulent funding times. So that's something that's very much on our agenda at some point. But yeah, we've got to take it one step at a time.
Well, look, it's been amazing to see what you've done with this thing in just the space of a year, and so good to know that we've got at least another 3 coming, with like more developments and more stuff happening. So really good luck with that, and I'm going to enjoy watching what you do with this.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the support.
Cheers.
Yeah, much appreciated, Steve. Thank you.